Imagine rejecting dozens of marriage proposals from the most powerful men in Europe. Kings, princes, dukes, all on their knees before her. But Elizabeth I refused them all. Why? The answer will surprise you, because it wasn't for lack of love, nor for religious devotion. It was for something much darker and more calculated. Stay until the end, because I'm going to reveal the true reason she took to her grave. Elizabeth was born in 1533 as a disappointment. Her father, Henry VIII, desperately wanted a male heir, but an Boleyn gave him a girl. 3 years later, something horrible happened. Henry ordered the beheading of Elizabeth's own mother under false accusations of treason and adultery. The 3-year-old girl was declared a bastard and lost everything overnight. Growing up in Henry VIII's court was like living in a minefield. Elizabeth watched her father marry 6 times, execute 2 wives, and discard others like old rags. She learned early that marriage, for a royal woman, wasn't about love. It was about power, control, and often death. Every matrimonial alliance ended in tragedy, imprisonment, or execution. At 14 years old, Elizabeth experienced her first romantic scandal. Thomas Seymour, her stepmother's husband, harassed the young princess by entering her bedroom at dawn. When her stepmother died, Seymour tried to marry Elizabeth to reach the throne. He was executed for treason, and Elizabeth nearly went with him, brutally interrogated, suspected of conspiracy. During the reign of her half-sister Mary I, the Bloody, Elizabeth was imprisoned in the Tower of London, the same place where her mother was beheaded. Accused of conspiring against the Queen, she spent months waiting for execution at any moment. Elizabeth knew she was one step away from death. It was at that moment she understood. Marriage would make her vulnerable, dependent, controllable. In 1558, at only 25 years old, Elizabeth became queen after Mary's death. England was devastated, bankrupt, religiously divided, despised in Europe. Everyone expected her to marry quickly with some strong prince who would really rule. After all, how could a single woman command a kingdom? Elizabeth had other plans. If Elizabeth truly loved anyone, it was Robert Dudley. Childhood friends, he was handsome, intelligent, and dangerously ambitious. The problem, he was married. In 1560, Dudley's wife was found dead with a broken neck at the foot of a staircase. Rumors exploded throughout Europe. Had Elizabeth and Dudley murdered her? The scandal nearly destroyed the Queen's reputation. Elizabeth wanted to marry Dudley, but her council warned it would be political suicide. Marrying him after his wife's suspicious death would destroy her legitimacy. The people would hate her. The nobility would revolt. Invasions would come from all sides. Elizabeth had to choose between the love of her life and her throne. She chose power. For 30 years, Elizabeth used marriage as a diplomatic weapon. Philip II of Spain, she strung him along for years with empty promises. Austrian archdukes, French princes. She negotiated, flirted, promised, but never concluded. Each suitor was a piece on the political chessboard. While they waited for her answer, they didn't invade England. It was a brilliant game of manipulation. Elizabeth created a brilliant narrative. She was married to England and her subjects were her children. Wearing a ring in public, she declared that it was her wedding ring with the nation. This image transformed her into an almost mystical figure. The Virgin Queen, pure, dedicated only to the people. It was political propaganda of the highest level. Parliament constantly begged her, "Your Majesty, marry and give us an heir." Elizabeth responded with controlled fury. "Do you think I do and think about this day and night? My mortality haunts me." But she knew that naming an heir while alive was signing her death warrant. The nobles would group around the successor, conspiring to hasten her to the grave. Here is the brutal truth that few admit. Elizabeth didn't marry because marrying meant total legal submission. In English law at the time, a married woman had no property, no rights. Everything automatically passed to the husband. If Elizabeth married, her husband would become king and she, metalliquing consort. She would lose all the power she fought for. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, was Elizabeth's cousin and had legitimate claims to the English throne. Catholic, beautiful, and married 3 times. Mary represented everything Elizabeth rejected. When Mary fled to England, asking for protection, Elizabeth imprisoned her. For 19 long years, Mary remained captive, plotting conspiracies from prison. Conspiracy after conspiracy was discovered, all involving Mary Stuart as the center of plans to assassinate Elizabeth. Catholic nobles wanted to put Mary on the throne and marry her to some powerful prince. Elizabeth resisted pressure to execute her for years. Finally, in 1587, she signed the death warrant. Mary was beheaded and Elizabeth wept, but the throne was secure. Spain saw Mary's execution as the final insult. Philip II, Elizabeth's former suitor, launched the Invincible Armada in 1588 with 130 ships to conquer England. Elizabeth rode to Tilbury wearing silver armor and gave a legendary speech. "I have the body of a weak woman, but the heart and stomach of a king." The Armada was destroyed. The victory against Spain consolidated Elizabeth as one of the greatest monarchs in history. Under her reign, England went from bankrupt kingdom to world power. Shakespeare wrote his plays. Francis Drake explored the seas. The economy prospered. All this while she remained single, defying all expectations of her time. But loneliness took its toll. Robert Dudley died in 1588, and Elizabeth kept his last letter until the end of her days. Other favorites came, like the young and impetuous Earl of Essex, but none replaced Dudley. Elizabeth aged, surrounded by courtiers, but essentially alone. The price of absolute power was absolute loneliness. In her final years, Elizabeth refused to look in the mirror. The Virgin Queen, once called Beautiful Bess, was now an old woman with white hair hidden under red wigs. Her face was covered with poisonous white makeup, made of lead. She maintained the image of the eternal queen, but underneath was just a tired woman who sacrificed everything for the throne. In 1603, at 69 years old, Elizabeth was dying. Parliament begged her to name her successor. She resisted until the last moment, because naming a successor was admitting mortality, was giving up power. Finally, she whispered the name, James, King of Scotland, son of Mary Stuart. The irony was cruel. Her greatest enemy's son would inherit her throne. Elizabeth died on March 24th, 1603, without husband, without children, without direct heirs. She was the last of the Tudor dynasty, the lineage that began with her grandfather, Henry VII. The funeral was grand. Thousands cried in the streets of London. The Elizabethan era had ended, but her legacy was just beginning. So why did Elizabeth never marry? It wasn't because of childhood trauma, although that influenced her. It wasn't for love of Robert Dudley, although she loved him. It wasn't for devotion to England, although she truly cared about her people. It was simply for power. Elizabeth understood that, in the world of men, a married queen was just a wife with a title. Single, she was absolute. Elizabeth proved that a woman could rule alone, without needing a husband to legitimize her. She transformed her supposed weakness, being a woman and single, into her greatest political strength. She manipulated suitors, defeated armadas, executed rivals, all while maintaining the image of an untouchable virgin. It was a risky game. She played for 45 years, and she won. The dark truth Elizabeth took to her grave is this. She didn't believe in fairy tales. She saw what marriage did to her mother, beheaded. To her stepmother, Catherine Howard, beheaded. To Mary Stuart, beheaded. Marriage, for queens, was a death sentence. Elizabeth chose to live and reign alone, and she changed history forever. That was the Virgin Queen's secret. It wasn't purity. It wasn't devotion. It wasn't fear of men. It was the cold and calculated understanding that, in a world that wanted to control her, the only way to be free was to remain single. Elizabeth I chose power over everything, and for that, she became immortal. If you enjoyed this dark story of royalty, leave your like and subscribe to the Shadows of Royalty channel for more secrets that history doesn't tell.